All right. There we go. Now I got my mic on. I forgot about it. I was listening to something a little different than you all. But hold on, I got a text. Maybe that's what they was trying to tell me. My music, yeah, and I don't like that soul swami all big over my face. So give me a second. Oh man. So I changed my settings today. And all of my scenes, I'm trying to make sure I stop this drop scenes and stuff like that. So all of my scenes were out of order. They just weren't set up right. So I've been trying to get them back right, and they off a little bit. So I appreciate your patience as I adjusted that. Wow, let me tell you something. Facebook is so far behind. That's crazy. Because TikTok ain't that far behind. TikTok makes sense. But Facebook so far behind, it's like 10 minutes behind. I done sat down and everything. Okay, so we're going to start the book. What is it? Makes Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall, one of my favorite books. Um, it's a book that I love. So I'm not going to say it's one of my favorite books, but I do like it. And I kind of was tired of reading all that healing and growth books. So I guess this is, like I said, a little more biographical or something like that. But it was a great story. It definitely taught me when we get to the part where he talks about his emotions and feelings during his divorce. Man, I read that thing. I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to experience divorce. So he did a very good job at capturing the emotions you can feel while dealing with that. The chakra we are on is the throat. Colors light blue. Element is ether. On Tuesday we did, what do we do? 444 breathing. So we're gonna do that tonight too. I like that. We're gonna do 444 for our breathing exercise. That is in for a count of four, hold for a count of four, and out for a count of four. But we're gonna start with the bowl. Damn, it sounds like it's raining outside. I don't know if you been in the path of the snow, but we got a little snow where I'm at. Not too much. I wish we had a little more, but thank you, Liberty. I appreciate you. I can see you this time. Hey, let me know. Hold on. Let me stop that because I know the Dodge not working. So let me know if you notice it's still dropping frames and stuff. I'm trying to change my settings, and I got a new cord, but well, I'm getting one. I ain't got it yet. But it'll be here by next week. So, but let me know. Somebody else told me it was doing that, so I've been working. We gonna see. My bad, family. I got lost for a second. You can see, I don't know, I started looking at the swirl patterns in the drum, which is interesting. You hold it at a certain light, you can see the swirl patterns, and I didn't notice that before. So they distracted me. So we're going to do our 4-4-4 breathing exercise. Yeah, I know. I wanted enough snow that it at least cover the ground for a little bit. I wanted enough for us to enjoy, but not enough to knock the power out. You dig? And then I wanted everybody else to work from home, but it's all good. Oh, because listen, I took tomorrow off, and that's a big thing for me because I can't tell you the last time I actually took my birthday off. Yeah, from work. So it's huge that I took tomorrow off. And next year, I'm going to do so good. I'm going to try something. I'm going to actually plan something for my birthday. So I'll do better next year since I got this, taking it off. But I definitely took some time to open up my vulnerability and ask for some things I want and put it out in the universe and allowing people to actually show up for me. Yeah, definitely a workaholic and not a good thing. And then outside of workaholic, I travel so much so I've always, well, not always, but as I started branching into leadership positions, I travel a lot for work. You know what I mean? So I've been all over the United States and still go all over the United States for work. But I definitely want to do a little more international traveling. I have a passport. I was born internationally, but I need to use that more. So, and I haven't even been on a cruise, so that's my first goal. And my friend told me it's a lot of water. I expect that. So, but I should get some good content tomorrow. I hope. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. So you got these these TikTok badges, but nope, you close, Ashley. I appreciate you. It's tomorrow. Whoop whoop whoop. You came. I guess you're gonna hear us. So give me a shout out. You know I appreciate that. Um, any kind of shout out. I turned 1,000 years old, so that's good for me. And it's better because last year my birthday was wild. Last year, I mean, people actually even listen. I went to my people house, man. It's life is interesting. And on Tuesday we talked about soul and parts that make up your soul. And emotions is one of the parts that make up your soul. But the thing about emotions was the capacity to experience all the emotions. You know what I mean? So being able to allow yourself to go on the up and downs of emotions and developing or sharpening the tools on how to navigate them right. So last year, man, what a difference a year makes. Because last year, my birthday was forgotten. I went to my people house. They didn't even know. They sitting in there eating chicken. And I'm like, you know what today is? Wednesday. And there's the funny thing too. I don't even know how my birthday skipped Thursday, but it did. And I was like, nah, it's my birthday. I wound up going out to eat, and I enjoyed the dinner by myself, but it was just interesting. I did invite somebody, and I'm kind of glad they didn't go because I definitely didn't want to pay for nobody else's food on my birthday. So this year, I said my goal is to spend as little of my money as possible, and I'm not. I mean, I might spend a little bit, but I ain't trying to spend no cash. And I actually be vulnerable enough to put myself out there and ask and put the universe. Cause this is probably the first time I've actually asked for birthday gifts outside of being a kid since I've been 9. So that is growth. That's why I'm sharing you all that. We all on this healing. What? We all on this healing path together. So I try to be open and genuine with some of the areas of my own growth, and receiving is one. I'm such a giver, from a traumatic place, of course, and receiving is one of my difficult things. So even putting myself out there to allow to be received is crazy. But some of that I'm gonna talk about on the show. The next book is Makes Me Want to Holler. So we're not doing anything too spiritual. And we doing Makes Me Want to Holler because I was lazy. I was supposed to make a post. I thought about even going back to the other post, but I was supposed to make a post and see what we would like to read. But like I said, it's my birthday week. I ain't doing nothing I want to do. So I got lazy. I've been here cooking. I made me some, I've been showing out. So after I found out I had anemia and stuff like that, of course, I cut down my meat content, and which is interesting, and more vegetarian meals, right? So I made, and not even, I don't know, I just been mixing it up, but I had some, what did I make? Some egg roll bowls with red cabbage. Man, it was amazing. And tonight I made a mushroom and rainbow tomato fettuccine, on point. So I just actually been cooking and, trying to enjoy my day. So for the breathing exercise again, we're going to do 4, 4, 4. It is good for stress and anxiety. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, and you release for 4 seconds. And we're going to do that 3 times. On my count of 3, breathe in for 4. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. Last time. Breathe in 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold 4, 2, 3, 4. Release 4, 2, 3, 4. I look shiny. So for the element, is ether. And I want you to close your eyes if you can, if you're in a comfortable place or however you can envision, but I want you to picture yourself in your mind's eye with your hands out in front of you. And in your hands, I want you to begin to shape your heart. Use both of your hands. And as you shape in your heart, I want you to think about what it means to you, what your heart needs, what it values, the important things. And in your heart, I want you to begin to find the words to communicate your truths and the confidence to be able to convey those truths to those who need to hear them and to be able to share your testimonies with those that need to learn. And as you are shaping your heart in your hand, I want you to begin to speak positively to it. Tell your heart you're deserving of love. Tell your heart you can communicate. Tell your heart your truths are valuable. Tell your heart these things until you begin to feel a shift in your spirit. And as that shift in your spirit begins to come, I want you to affirm that shift by repeating after me. I speak and hear truths. I communicate honestly. I live an authentic life. I am fearless and free. I trust what I have to say. I speak and hear truth. I communicate honestly. I live an authentic life. I am fearless and free. I trust what I have to say. All right, so I'm excited. I put on my list of books a book that I wanted to get, and I actually did get one of them, so I'm turned about that. Hey, Todd, you supposed to tap that live like 10,000 times, so when I get finished, you be like, you got 2,000 likes. You Liberty got a tag to you. So I'm excited. I got one of my books today. Well, not today, but yesterday. And I thought about reading it to y'all first, but I don't know. I might read it to y'all one time. But it is The Giving Tree. I'm looking over to the left because it's over there. So I might as well get it since I keep on talking, looking at it. Yeah, so I don't know if you're familiar with The Giving Tree, but this is The Giving Tree. And it's by this guy. but it is a great story. It's supposed to be a story, but it's definitely giving poetry vibes. It's a long poem, and I think it is one of the best stories on love unconditional. And it's just about a boy and his best friend, a tree. But they go through life situations and ups and downs, but from beginning to end, he always rely on that tree. Doo-doo-doo. And also, I'm excited because I'm gonna have to. Honestly, I'm gonna have to take thank Tatiana for that. Thanks, Toddy. Not for the book, but what I'm about to say next. So, and she was asking me a bunch of questions today about um what I'd want to do on my birthday. Bunch of questions, right? And as I'm thinking about it afterwards, and I'm like, I might be able to get some good content for my birthday, right? And as soon as I thought about that, the next thing that popped in my mind was from my soul to yours. And I think that's a fantastic catchphrase. So I'm going to start using that a lot more. So I already shared it with one person and they thought it was great. I think it fits our vibe tremendously here. So, right. So we are on, again, makes me want to holler. Nathan McCall, chapter 1. The fellas and I were hanging out at the corner store one afternoon when the strangest thing happened. A white boy who appeared to be about 18 or 19 years old came pedaling a bicycle casually through the neighborhood. I don't know if he was lost or just confused, but he was definitely in the wrong place to be doing the tourist bit. Somebody spotted him and pointed him out to the rest of us. Look, what's that mutt doing riding through here? Is he crazy? It was automatic. We all took off after him. We caught him on the Cavalier Boulevard and knocked him off the bike. He fell to the ground and it was all over. We were on him like white on rice. Ignoring the passing cars, we stomped them and kicked them. Mm. My stick my stick partners kicked him in the head and faced and watched the blood gush from his mouth. I kicked him in the stomach and nuts where I knew it would hurt. Every time I drove my foot into his balls, I felt better. Each blow delivered, I gritted my teeth as I remembered some racial slight. This for all the times you followed me around the stores. And this for the times you treated me like a nigga. And this is for GP, general principles, just cause you white. While we kicked, he laid there curled up in a fetal position, trying to use his hands to cover his head. We blooded him so badly that I got a little scared and backed off. The others, seeing how badly he was messed up, moved away too. But one dude kept stomping him like he had gone berserk. He seemed crazed and consumed in the pleasure of kicking that white boy. When he finished, he reached down and picked up the white dude's bike, lifted it as high as he could above his head, and slammed it down hard on him. The white guy didn't even flinch. He was out cold. I feared he might be dead until I saw him breathing. We walked away laughing, boasting, competing for bragging rights for who had done the most damage. Man, did you see how red that dude's face turned when I bust his lip? I almost broke my hand on that ugly mofo. Beating up that white boy like that made us feel good inside. I guess we might have been 14 or 15 by then, and it felt so good that we stumbled over each other, sometimes trying to get in extra kicks and punches. When we bum rushed white boys, it made us feel like we were beating all white people on behalf of all blacks. We call it getting some get back. Securing revenge for all the shit that they'd heap on us blacks all these years. They were still heaping hell on us, and especially on our parents. The difference was, cats in my generation weren't taking it lying down. After my older brother Dwight got his driver's license, a group of us would pile into my stepfather's car some evenings and cruise through nearby white neighborhoods, searching for people walking the street. We'd spot some whites out, get out, rush over, and using sticks and fists try to beat them within an inch of their lives. Sometimes when I sit back and think about how crazy things the fellas and I did and remember the hate and violence that we unleashed, it's hard to believe I was once a part of that, all of that. I feel so removed from it now that I've left the streets. Yet, when I consider white America and the way it treats blacks, our random rage in these old days makes perfect sense to me. Looking back, it's easy to understand how it all got started. Chapter 2, Cavalier Manor. For as long as I can remember, it seems as though there was no aspect of my family's reality that wasn't affected by whites, right on down to the creation of the neighborhoods I grew up in, known as Cavalier Manor. It was located in Portsmouth, Virginia. Most of Cavalier Manor was built in the early 1960s by a local construction bigwig named George T. McLean. Neighborhood lore had it he was a white liberal do-gooder who felt blacks in Portsmouth needed a community that would inspire pride and help improve their lot. But just as many people thought McLean was a racist who got alarmed by the civil rights movement and built Cavalier Manor to encourage blacks to move there rather than into the white neighborhoods, McLean started building from the edge of an older, low-income black neighborhood and went southward, making the houses larger and more elegant with each successive phase. He named the streets after U.S. presidents and prominent blacks, particularly entertainers. The streets had names as Belafonte Drive and Basie Crescent and Eckstein Drive and Home Avenue. To add to the sense of optimism that the neighborhood was supposed to reflect, they even named one street Freedom Avenue. Although some folks there like to think of themselves as middle class, Cavalier Manor was a working class neighborhood. Most of those who moved there were active or retired military personnel. Few had completed high school or gone to college. The retirees usually found blue-collar jobs at one of the massive military installations in the area, which is home to some of the world's largest shipyards. Many others who moved here were uneducated working-class folk who had scrimped and saved enough money to move from public housing. By the time the bulk of it was finished, Cavalier Manor had come to be one of the largest black neighborhoods in the Southeast. In terms of political power, this meant that our neighborhood emerged as a potentially influential voting bloc. In terms of street power, it meant that Cavalier Manor surfaced as a hell of a gang force throughout the Tidewater area, which spans several Virginia cities. The neighborhood was so big that dudes formed distinct gangs in different sections of the community. These gangs fought each other sometimes and united when fighting downtown boys. But I was unaware of all that street action when I first came to Cavalier Manor. I was only 9 years old then. In 1964, the year my family moved to Portsmouth from Key West, Florida, where my stepfather had served a 3-year tour of duty in the Navy. We'd also lived in Morocco and Norfolk, Virginia, but in Portsmouth was my stepfather's last duty station before he retired after giving Uncle Sam 20 years. I still remember how excited my brothers and I were about the moving into our first real house. When we drove into the neighborhood, our eyes and mouth flew wide open. We saw impressive homes with freshly sprouted lawns, broad sidewalks, and newly paved streets. On each side of the street that led out to our section of the community were two sets of stately white brick pillars with the black cast iron bars flowing regally through their tops. A huge sign printed Old English lettering was mounted on each set of pillars. Welcome to Cavalier Manor. My brothers and I thought we had died and gone to heaven. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood I associated with black people then. We'd always lived in drab apartment buildings that looked like public housing. All the black people we know lived that way. In Cavalier Manor, we pulled into our very own driveway, which led into a garage where we could park our ride. When we walked in the house, the sun shone brightly through the windows, bringing out every wonderful detail of the place. It was a single-story structure with 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a formal dining room. I could feel its newness and smell the freshness of the recently painted walls and ceiling. The hardwood floors had been sanded and buffed. Tiny mounds of sawdust remained in the corners, as if construction workers had left only hours before we arrived. My brothers and I ran outside to inspect our front and backyards. The air was filled with the steady hum of lawnmowers and the sweet smell of freshly cut grass. Pine needles that had fallen from many tall trees out back were scattered everywhere. We learned to hate raking those pine needles, but our initial reaction to our new home and neighborhood was that we loved everything. Hmm. Located in a cul-de-sac named Vaughn Court, ours was one of several streets that the white folks misspelled in their haste. There were 12 homes in the court. We lived in number 6. Several blocks away, a large lake, Crystal Lake, wound through the portion of that neighborhood. We got that house just in time to accommodate the expansion of our family. Along with my parents, there were my 2 brothers, Dwight and Billy, who were 2 and 4 years old, older than me, respectively. A short time after we arrived, my mother gave birth to another boy, the first child born to her and my stepfather. They named him Brian Keith Alvin, after Brian Keith, the white actor. As she had in the past, my maternal grandmother, who we called Bampoos, came to live with us. Then my stepfather took in Junie, a son from his previous marriage, who was 3 years older than me. So within our first year we were living there, our family nearly doubled in size. It was crowded and we were broke as hell, but it felt like we were living large. In those first few years at Cavalier Manor, offered a huck and fin type existence for me and my brother. I hung with Dwight and Greg, an only child who lived across the street. They were my initial tickets into the world beyond our street. They were both 2 years older than me and were often forced by my parents to let me hang with them. Billy and Julie, who considered themselves bona fide teenagers, developed their own circle of friends. We did everything mostly innocent mischief. We skipped Sunday services at the neighborhood Presbyterian church to explore a construction site, climb on house frames, and throw dirt bombs at each other till construction supervisors came and chased us off. We went on expeditions into nearby woods and played cowboys and Indians with cherry poppers, reeds that would hollowed out, and shoot berries at each other. We even ventured to Crystal Lake and skinny dip whenever we could evade grown-up scouting there to keep children away. We delivered newspapers and mowed neighbors' lawns for spending change, rode our bikes through the streets, and fought and made up at least twice a week. On weekends, we went to the movies or took turns spending the night at each other's homes. And we massacred frogs. Because Cavalier Manor had once been a mass of wood and march, the place was crawling with them. We tossed frogs as high as we could in the air and watched them descend, spreading their limbs as though they're parachuting from a plane. Then they'd splatter in the street and cough up their gut. We'd walk over to see how the splattered frog intestines look. We used those frogs for informal biology experiments. What would happen if you put a black widow spider or 20 red ants in a jar with a frog? How long can a frog float in a jar full of Kool-Aid without drowning? Why are you putting a frog in Kool-Aid? Boy, they need some parental supervision. What would happen if you put a frog in a jar, poured in gasoline, and torched it? We answered all of those questions and more. We also hopped the back of the candy truck. In those days, every southern black neighborhood had a candy man and a candy lady. The candy lady was usually a housewife who lived in the neighborhood and sold sweets, potato chips, sodas, and other stuff out of the house to earn extra cash. The candy man was a traveling salesman who packed a truck with everything from collard greens, fish, and grocery items to cakes, candies, potato chips, and other children's delight, and drove slowly through the neighborhoods, ringing a bell. The Candyman theme through the neighborhoods most evenings or nights. We'd wait until he pulled away from the curb after making a stop, then we'd run and hop on the back of the truck or running board as he picked up speed. It reminded me of of TV westerns where courageous cowboys hop from their white horses onto running boards of runaway stagecoaches and rescue the screaming white ladies inside. At first, we rode for a block or so before leaping off. Then we chanced longer distances, dangling off the back of the truck and holding on for dear life. Once we rode all the way across town. It hadn't occurred to us that the Candyman didn't live in Cavalier Manor until he pulled up to a house and turned off the engine. We hopped off the truck and, and had to walk miles to get back home. There was only so much trouble we can get into those early days. Cavalier Manor was a neighborhood filled with surrogate parents, people who would punish you like your mama and daddy if they caught you doing wrong. The worst among them were Grace, an honorary old woman who always fussed at us about walking on her grass, and Miss Patterson, who seemed to live at her front picture window, where she always peered out and caught us throwing rocks on Roosevelt Boulevard. By the time we got home, she would have already called Mama and given her a full report. I know that's right. School was also a part of that surrogate system. Most of the teachers at Cavalier Manor Elementary, where I went for 4th and 5th grades, lived in the neighborhood. Those teachers spanked us like we were their own when we acted up in class. If a disciplinary note didn't reach home, teachers were sure to update parents in church or while standing in the checkout line at Earl's Supermarket on Victory Boulevard. Some of our parents even took it upon themselves to patrol the neighborhood on school days to make sure we were where we were supposed to be. We kids hated that surrogate system. It seemed that everybody was so nosy and bent on making sure we didn't get away with anything. It was only years later when black communities as we know them started falling apart that I came to understand the system for hidden blessings it contained. It had built-in mechanisms for reinforcing values and trying to prevent us from becoming hellions some of us were turned out to be. Despite our own sense of well-being in Cavalier Manor, there were two things that reminded us of shaky place in the world. One was poor whites who lived nearby in Academy Park. Cavalier Manor was separated from Academy Park by a commercial strip of Victory Boulevard. Blacks in Cavalier Manor lived on one side of Victory Boulevard, and whites in Academy Park lived on the other side. It was a poetic twist of fate that well-off blacks lived so close to the poorest, scruffiest looking whites in the city. That's funny. It looked like there was something wrong with that picture. Seeing blacks turn their dark, wide noses up at whites the way they did. Academy Park whites were mad as hell about that, and they made it known. It was rumored that white squadrons sometimes stole into Cavalier Manor at nights to terrorize. It was the fact that they hurled bottles and bricks when we drove through their neighborhood. The main street through Academy Park offered the shortest route to other parts of the city. Sometimes blacks gave in to the temptation to take the shortcut through there to get to downtown. Shortly after we moved in, a neighbor warned my parents, be careful not to drive through Academy Park. Them is some mean whites over there. They'll stone your car and shoot at you drive through there. One night when I was about 10 years old, a little girl my age was shot to death while sitting near a picture window in her front living room on Freedom Avenue. Nobody was arrested, but the people in the neighborhood said they were sure it was one of those jealous whites from Academy Park. The killing brought home the fact that nice neighborhood or not, we still weren't safe in Cavalier Manor. My mother had trained my brothers and me to be leery of white folks, but she stepped up her precautions after the murder. Mama told us not to answer the front door for white folks or Jehovah's Witnesses when she and my stepfather were away. Whenever either came to the door, we just peeked through the curtains and kept quiet until they left. Our friends and neighbors were cautious too. We all regarded the sight of white people in the neighborhood as an ominous sign, like rain clouds forming overhead. Whenever a white man came into the cul-de-sac and got out of his car, people who were outdoors working in their yards stopped what they were doing and watched to see whose house he'd gone to. They watched when he left too. Then looked at the house he had visited for signs of bad news. Another reminder of the tenuous of our lives was a big, ugly ditch. It stood prominently in the main thoroughfare as an embarrassment monument to our blackness. That weedy eyesore, which bred snakes and all kinds of rodents, cut straight through the middle of the neighborhood on Cavalier Boulevard. That ditch stood out like a grotesque open wound. The city never completely closed it, despite vigorous campaigns by homeowners to get it covered. It was as if the city fathers purposely left it open to make a statement to remind blacks that the community would be only so nice, and that no matter how uppity we got in Cavalier Manor, the whites downtown still called the shots. Chapter 3. Nigga. The folks in my neighborhood were resolute about trying to protect our physical safety, but seemed confused when confronted with more subtle racial hazards, such as our fixation on color. I was a product of that confusion. My enchantment with whiteness dated at least far back as Key West. Hold on. Make sure ain't nothing messing up. Okay, never mind. My enchantment with whiteness dated as far back as Key West, where our family got our first television set. I'd spend hours in front of that black and white set, gazing spellbound at whites on TV, drinking in the beauty of their ivory skin, which seemed purer, cleaner than my own. I was no more than 7 or 8 years old, but I still recall Clairol Hale coloring commercial where they zoomed in that camera for a close up on some saucy white broad who who sensually tossed her blonde mane backward and forward all over her face. Near the end of the commercial, a throaty voice chimed in and said, "Is it true that blondes have more fun?" I thought of that ad every time I saw a blonde in real life or on TV. It also came to mind one day when I noticed a group of young whites riding down the street in a convertible ahead of our family car. The convertible's top was down, and the white people's long hair fluttered in the wind like TV blondes. I thought white people have more fun. On a sunny afternoon around that time, I was playing at the beach with my brothers when a little white girl standing nearby began covering her body with the pale, pasty-like clay and blankets that the Key West ocean floor. I imitated her and rubbed clay all over my body. The girl looked at me and said kindly, "If you let the clay dry, maybe you'll be white like me." For a moment, I considered that it might just work. It seemed a grand idea to let the clay dry on my body to turn me chalky white. After all, white people have more fun. It's funny how the memory works. You can forget the name of someone you were introduced to yesterday, yet recall minor details of incidents that took place in your life years ago. For some reason, I always remembered that exchange. When I reflected on it years later, it occurred to me that even at that young age, a little black boy and a little white girl had already begun to learn their place in this race obsessed country. The little girl knew she was a member of a favored race, and I understood that my color would burden me. In Cavalier Manor, I sensed that other blacks struggled with variations of my racial affliction, though I didn't recognize it as such. Even some grown-ups who set out to arm their youngs with racial pride seemed haunted by the contradictions which their children absorbed. Whenever we were going to restaurants or other public places where a lot of white folks would be around, my mother insisted that we get meticulously groomed and pressed beforehand. And when we got there, she reminded us it was more of a threat to sit stiff as soldiers and be quiet. Every now and then, if one of us dared to cut up in public, Mama would yank him firmly by the arm, pull him to within an inch of her face, and whisper through clenched teeth, "Stop showing your color. Stop acting like a..." My brother and I would sit solemnly and watch as rowdy white kids entered those same public places, shirtless, barefoot, grimy. Their parents gave them the run of the joint, allowing them to stomp, shout, scream, do virtually anything they wanted, including tear up the place. I envied their freedom and crawled and craved the specialness that excluded them from our self-defeating burden. I know that's just right. It seemed like we were ninjas by birth, right? And destined to spend our entire lives striving in vain to shed that wrap. But white people could never be ninjas, even when they acted like with a capital N. Without knowing what they were doing, a lot of adults in black families passed along notions to their young about white folks' superiority. Even Bampoos, my grandmother did her part in conditioning us. Her husband, my grandfather, died of a mysterious causes before I was born. Bampoos lived with our family for most of the time after that and worked as a domestic for whites, cleaning their homes, cooking their meals, and raising their children. When we moved to Cavalier Manor, Bampoos began working for a affluent Jewish family, the Diamondsteins, who lived in Norfolk. Every morning, she rose before daybreak and called several city buses to get to their house 10 miles away. The daily trips to Diamondsteins provided Bampoos her only diversion away from our home. She was shy and never socialized outside of the family. About the most exciting thing going on in Bampoos' life was fierce games of checkers she played with my brothers and me. During those games, Bampoos often told us what the Diamondstein's children had done that day. The two Diamondstein children, Richard and Jamie, were about my age. Bampoos told us every detail about them, their habits, their likes and dislikes, and how well they were doing at school. She told us about fine dinner parties their parents threw and elaborate vacations their families took. It was our first glimpse into the world of white people beyond My Three Sons and Leave It to Beaver on TV. To me, Richard and Jamie took on the flawless, larger than life quality of storybook characters. I decided I wanted to be just like them. When Papoose brought us clothes that Richard and Jamie parents were throwing away, I relished those threads like they were store bought and nourished the secret pride that they made me look like their former owners. Once, when Bampoos brought was helping me get dressed, she said Richard and Jamie tuck in their t-shirts inside their underwear, and I began tucking my t-shirt inside my Fruit of a Loom briefs just like them. Bampoos saw how much I admired Richard and Jamie and used it to gain advantage when she was unable to catch me to lay on a spanking for some misdeed of mine. All she needed to do to gain control of me was mention my white child's idol. Boy, why don't you stop acting up like that? I don't have to tell Richard and Jamie more than once to stop doing something. They are nice boys. They do everything I tell them to. It worked too. I straighten up and try to behave like the gentleman I imagined Richard and Jamie to be. I had I had often tried to imagine how that family looked. One evening when me and my brothers were and I was sitting in the den watching TV, Bampoos brought home a picture of herself taken at the Diamondstein's house. When she handed me the picture, I studied long and hard the faces of the white people I'd heard so much about. In that picture, Bampoos, dressed in a maid's uniform, stood in the Diamondstein's kitchen, excuse me, with an apron tied around her waist. Jamie, the younger boy, stood directly in front of her, clasping her wrinkled caramel-colored hands. Richard stood beside his brother in front of Bampoos. The boys had scrubbed, well-attended look about them. They were dressed in fine clothes and their hair was neatly combed. Bampoos, the short, petite woman who usually maintained a poker face, stood there smiling like she was proud mother of those two white boys. Looking at that picture, I couldn't help but feel jealous. It seemed Richard and Jamie had laid claim to the attention and affections of my grandmother that should have been reserved for me. I noticed in the picture that Jamie had dark straight hair, which he parted and combed sideways on the top, like beaver cleavers. I wondered why my thick, unyielding naps couldn't be straight and supple so I can jerk my head back and sling my hair out of my eyes the way white folks constantly did. One day I got a can of my stepfather's promenade and set out to change my steel wool into good hair. I packed that thick, heavy grease into my hair and brushed it until the naps began to unfurl and lie down on my head in perfect submission, just like Jamie's. Minutes later, my hair started to shrivel. It went from straight to curly and back to nappy, nappy and greasy. My parents were prepared to take us to church that morning. Just as I was about to climb into the car, my mother took one look at my glistening head and got mad as hell. Boy, what you do to your hair? I only put some grease in it, mama. Mama yanked me away from that car and slapped me in the back of the head. Whack! Get your butt back in that house and wash that mess out your head, boy. I went inside wailing, grabbed a bar of soap, and began to scour at my greasy head in the bathroom sink like dirty clothes on the washboard. I nearly scalded my scalp trying to rinse out that gummy promenade. Worse than blistering water was the painful realization that no matter how hard I tried, I could never make my hair straight like white people's. After returning from the Navy in 1966, my stepfather held two jobs to make ends meet. He worked in the shipyard, and on weekends he went to do the gardening work for the white people in the neighborhood called Sterling Point. Initially, my parents decided I was too young to go to Sterling Point, but Billy, Dwight, and Junie went almost from the start. They hated it and bitched about it all the time. It wasn't clear to me that they were so annoyed about. My stepfather paid them by the hour for working with him, so I figured they should feel grateful. My brothers used the money they earned to buy school clothes. They always had spending change in their pockets. What more did they want? I had a big time dreams of what I'd do with the money I made when I got old enough to go to Sterling Point. Finally, when I turned 13, I got my chance. Sterling Point was the most affluent neighborhood in Portsmouth. Not only were its white residents set apart from everybody else in the city by their wealth and status, they were physically separated from the rest of by the James River and the Churchland Bridge. I remember that when we cruised down High Street toward the bridge, my stepfather slowed that car at an incline to avoid rattling the garden tools sticking out from the back of the trunk. I sat in the back seat, sandwiched between Dwight and Billy, who were staring quietly out the windows. We reached the top of the high arching bridge, and I looked over into the river and saw hordes of colorful sailboats drifting lazily along the water. I nudged Billy. Look at all those sailboats in the river. He yanked his elbow away from my hand, gritted his teeth, and growled in a whisper, "Leave me alone, boy." Dwight, likewise, and Junie, who was sitting up front, ignored the dazzling sights of the boats with their brilliantly colored sails. I didn't know specifically why my brothers had an attitude that Sunday morning, but it was clear that our destination had a lot to do with it. When we reached the other side of that bridge, Dad turned left into an elegant neighborhood, and I saw shady trees and sprawling, two-story brick estates with antebellum-style columns, expansive yards, and wrought iron fences. Despite its elegance, the neighborhood had a ghostly antiseptic air about it. The people didn't socialize outdoors or walk down the streets like they did in Cavalier Manor. The only people visibly in this placid streets were groups of black women who trudged along slowly up the curbless lanes into widened driveways and stately mansions. I nudged the white and asked, "Who are they?" "They work for white people out here. They do the same kind of work a Bampoos does for the Diamond Steins." In those first weekends, I learned to mow the grounds of the large estates, trim the hedges, prune the shrubs, and attend to the flower beds. We gave the places the manicured look that you see in the House and Garden magazine. It seemed just like working at home, until, that is, three white boys about my age reminded me one day where I was. My stepfather and I was down on our knees pulling up crabgrass. When they bolted out the front door of the house, we were tending to and began bouncing the ball in the spiraling driveway a few feet away from us, where they were working. Every now and then I looked up and waited for them to acknowledge my stepfather's presence in the way that my parents had my step brothers and me to speak to grown ups when entering their company, but the boys never said a word. They didn't even look his way. They kept on bouncing the ball and ran around us as if we were trees, shrubs, or some other inanimate part of the scenery. Any other time, my stepfather would have gotten on those children cases for forgetting their manners. But this day, he looked up whenever the ball bounced close by, flashed those three boys a fixed smile, and kept working. Those kids' arrogance made me self conscious. It occurred to me how docile my stepfather, and I must have looked there on our knees working on their yard while they played carefree about. They were as self assured about their exalted place in this world as my stepfather was certain of how contained his life was. To them, he was no more than a utility, a faceless gardener. To him, they were important people, children of some of the most powerful white folks in Portsmouth. One of these powerful white folks and one of my father's best clients was Richard Davis, who eventually became the mayor of Portsmouth. We saw him occasionally, buttoned down in a suit and tie, rushing to his cars. Always he dashed out, waved, then hurried and drove off. I saw more of his wife, an attractive young blonde who busied herself supervising domestic matters. One hot day, she came outside to talk to my stepfather. Bonnie, I brought you and your boys some lemonade out to help cool you off. It sure is hot out here. Yeah, it really is hot, he said, straightening to make small talk. We took a break and gulped down the lemonade. Miss Davis looked at us and smiled contently, then issued more instructions for the day. Bonnie, I want you to do the flower beds for me today and pull up the grass around the back of the house. I don't want any of it to build up too much because it might attract snakes. When she had finished, Miss Davis pranced back into a spacious, air-conditioned house and closed the door. My stepfather glanced uneasily at me. I turned away, embarrassed that I had seen the humiliating exchange. I set down my unfinished drink, returned to work, and thought about what I just heard. Bonnie? That was the first time I heard anybody, including my mother, call my stepfather by his first name. He disliked his name anyway because it was a girl's name, but most important was the issue of respect. He addressed Miss Davis by her last name, but she called him Bonnie. The sound of name rolling so casually off a white woman's lips stabbed me like a knife to the chest. It sounded like she was talking to a child, a boy. At school, it was commonly understood that white folks considered grown black men to be boys. Boy was fighting word, one of the most detested, disrespectful things somebody could call somebody else. More fights started over a person calling another boy than anything else. To continue that indignity, we addressed each other respectfully as man, even though we were not adults. Hey man, you going to play basketball today? Nah man, I got too much homework to do. In the following weeks, I began to pay close attention to other racial nuances in my stepfather's interactions with people at Sterling Point. Oh shoot, I'll finish this and we wrap it up. I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like the way he humbled himself and smiled when white folks were around. I grew to hate the sight of his big 6'2" frame, kneeling with wide brimmed straw hat on his head, pulling up crabgrass while one of those privileged white people stood over him, supervising the menial work. It looked too much like pictures of downtrodden sharecroppers and field slaves I've seen in books. It is difficult at times to pinpoint defining moments in life, but I'm certain that period marked my realization of something it seemed white folks had been trying to get across to me for most of my young life. There were two distinct worlds in America and a different set of rules for each. The white one was full of possibilities of life. The dark one was just that, dark and limited. Over time, I shared my brother's resentment when my stepfather made us go into Sterling Point. Even though I knew my family badly needed the extra money, when we drove through Cavalier Manor during our rides to Sterling Point, I slumped down in the seat so my friends wouldn't see me ride in the car with a lawnmower and gardening tools sticking out the trunk. I joined my brothers in their silent brooding during the rides back home. and like them, became sullen, even when we crossed the scenic Churchland Bridge overlooking the colorful sailboats. All right, family. We will stop there and pick up from there next week. I hope you have a yeah. I know, right? That was an interesting way to start a book. They went off just jumping somebody, beating them down. I can't even tell you the last time I probably haven't read makes me want to holler in. Ooh, I think I was in high school, so I don't want to date myself too much, but I definitely was in high school when I met, but it was at least 10, 15 years. Listen, I'm laughing. I was going to say 10, 15 years ago, but shoot, I graduated from college 20 years ago. So, yeah, high school was a lot longer than 20 years ago. So, it was at least, I might be going close to 30 years. Jesus Christ. Don't tell nobody, though. Don't tell nobody. We getting old. Right. Don't do. Really don't tell nobody for real, for real. That's so terrible. Thanks. I'm glad you joined. It is a great book. I said it's I always I'm impartial to like those coming of age movies and coming of age books. I like to hear about people's stories and their lives. I like to hear testimonies. You know what I mean? Because I talked about how we like to give advice, but people have their own thought processes, their own people have the autonomy to make their own decisions. So we don't really care about your advice. What is more helpful than your advice is your testimony. Because I may be able to deduce or come to a different perspective from your same story that you never would have thought of that would be beneficial and helpful to my life outside of your advice. Because your advice is based on your experience and it's good for your life, which may not be the best for mine. But I love that book for that reason. It gave me a little perspective and let me know some things I didn't want to deal with. But again, um, tomorrow my birthday. Whoop, 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 whoop. Enjoy it. If you can't join us, well, Tuesday we'll start figuring. I mean, we'll finish talking about this. We're not finished. We'll do a little more talks about the soul. I haven't quite decided what we're gonna discuss, but we'll go deeper into the soul and what that is and how it helps us. If not, we'll catch you next Thursday as we continue reading. Makes me want to holler. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and you get some rest and you do everything you can think of in life. Hold on, I'm trying to make sure. I know it's not gonna work. And I appreciate you sharing a little time with me. Um, much gratitude, the blessings to you and your family. So I thank you. Peace. Oh no, I gotta start saying my close out from my soul to yours. I wish you peace.